Well, transfers are a part of college sports in general right now, and certainly a part of college football as the college football season approaches. Transfers are going to be all over the place. Last week when we talked about quarterbacks in the ACC, we talked about how many of them are potentially starting transfers. I think like half of the conference is going to be starting a transfer, maybe more. Half of the conference is taking a transfer to ACC Media Day this week. I mean, transfers are everywhere. We know this. I'm not breaking any news there. But let's talk about transfers at Pitt. Who have been the best transfers to join Pitt in the Pat Narduzzi era? There's been like close to 70. Now, most of them have happened in the last few years with the transfer portal, but Pat Narduzzi has taken transfers every year he's been at Pitt. He's taken close to 70 guys since he arrived in 2015, way back with like Nate Peterman, Dwayne Hendricks, and Mark Scarpinato that first year, all the way up to taking 16 guys out of the transfer portal this year. So let's talk about those transfers. Who have been the 5 best transfers at Pitt in the Pat Narduzzi era? And is it possible that one or maybe more of the guys in that top 5 ranking are on the roster right now? I mean, obviously it's possible. Obviously they are, because I wouldn't have said it like that if they weren't. Which guys on the current roster make up or are part of the top 5 Narduzzi transfers? Let's talk about the top 5 and then some honorable mentions and kind of what the transfer portal has brought to Pitt over the years on the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Tuesday here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, hanging out with you this morning for a little bit of Pitt sports talk. We are getting closer and closer to the start of training camp. I think they're actually probably going to kick off like a week from today. So we are in the home stretch to training camp. And once training camp starts, that means we are in the home stretch to the start of the 2025 football season. So we've got lots of football stuff to talk about. And it'll be less and less of this ranking the top 5 transfers of the Narduzzi era and more of what's going on, what are we hearing, what are we seeing at Pitt as the Panthers move through training camp, head toward that season opener against Duquesne, and then the other 11 games on the schedule. As always, make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. We have these daily morning Pitt videos Monday through Friday. We have our weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. We have post-game shows and press conferences and interviews and all kinds of stuff. We'll have practice videos during training camp. Everything you could possibly need or want or hope for, and maybe more, all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe, and that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. And then over on the website, you see it below, Panther-Lair.com, the Pitt site on the 24/7 Sports Network, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards to talk to other Pitt fans. We have lots of content for you at Panther-Lair.com, and then you go on the message boards and join the conversation there. I think it's the best online community of Pitt fans you're going to find, and you want to be a part of it if you are a Pitt fan, so go check it out, Panther-Lair.com. So I did make a spreadsheet of every transfer who has joined Pitt since Pat Narduzzi arrived in 2015. And I have at one point in the past, I think a couple of years ago, ranked every transfer who transferred to Pitt. I think I did that in the spring of 2023, I think it was. At that point, there were far fewer transfers to rank, because the reality is, like, a whole bunch of them, most of them, almost all of them have come in the last few years. Pitt added 16 transfers this year, 15 last year, 7 the year before, and 8 the year before that. So going back to the transfer class of 2022, ahead of the 2022 season, Pitt has added 46 transfers just in those 4 years, ahead of the 22, 23, 24, and 25 seasons, out of 68 total. So you're talking about Pat Narduzzi being here for, coming up on 11 seasons from 2015 through 2025. 68 transfers over the course of those 11 seasons. 46 of the 68 have come in the last 4 years. And that's because the transfer portal has created just a flow of transfers in and out of programs every year. So Pat Narduzzi has always taken transfers. That's always been a part of it. He took 3 in 2015. He took 4 in 2017. He took 5 in 2020, 4 the next year. And he's taken at least 1 every year since he got to Pitt. But it has stepped up in the last few years, and understandably so. So a couple of years ago when I ranked all of the transfers, there were probably, 30. There were probably about 30 transfers to rank. They've added 38 since then, and so it's a bit more daunting to, it's a bit more daunting of a task to rank 68 guys, or even if you just take the guys prior to this year, 52 transfers, 1 through 52. I'll probably do it at some point, and that'll be fun. But in the meantime, I thought we would just rank the top 5. Now, if this sounds familiar, you might have read the 3-2-1 column on Friday, which would be very great. I hope you did read the 3-2-1 column on Friday. I don't mean to repeat myself, but hopefully it's, we'll get into a little bit of a different discussion about it. But I did rank the top 5 transfers in the Narduzzi era in that 3-2-1 column on Friday. So you know where this is going. You know who we're going to end up with as, all 5 spots. You know who's going to be number 1. And maybe if you didn't read the column, maybe you've already guessed who's going to be number 1. But let's take a second. I'm going to go through some honorable mentions. And while I do that, I want you to think about who you think will be the number 1 transfer of the Narduzzi era, according to me. Who am I? Because when I first sat down and started this to rank the top 5, I had a hard time coming up with an obvious option. And then the more I thought about it, I realized actually there is an obvious option, and he's on the roster this year. But first, a few honorable mentions. Konate Mumpfield, I think, is an honorable mention. You could probably make a case for him being in the top 5. I have him just outside the top 5. He made 33 starts at Pitt, caught more than 150 passes. He's actually the 3rd leading receiver of the Narduzzi era. You've got Jordan Addison, you've got Maurice French, and then you've got Konate Mumpfield in terms of total receptions. Had almost 2,000 yards over those 3 years. Only had 11 touchdowns. Probably the biggest statistical shortcoming of Konate Mumpfield's 3 years at Pitt was not scoring more touchdowns. Not all of that's going to be in his control. But still, 154 passes, 1,940 yards, 11 touchdowns. Pretty strong numbers from Konate Mumpfield. I think he was a good, underrated player. Seemed like a guy who was very solid, but I think he had the potential to be more than that. And we'll see. I'll be interested to see what his pro career brings, because I think he's a pretty talented wide receiver who probably could have done more than he did in his 3 years at Pitt. Another honorable mention, Donovan McMillan. And here's a guy who I think on the resume you would say, wow, he's probably a top 5 guy. And I have him just outside the top 5, but he went back-to-back 100-tackle seasons. He was at Pitt for 2 years and recorded 100-plus tackles in each of those years. The last time somebody had back-to-back 100-tackle seasons at Pitt was 2007 and 2008 with Scott McKillop. So, if you're Donovan McMillan and you came in and did something that hadn't been done in 17 years, I'd say you had a pretty good run. I think you at least deserve honorable mention, honors here. And like I said, I think he's just outside that top 5. Another guy that's just outside that top 5, Lyndon Cooper. And maybe a bit of a dark horse option here, but he came in, won the starting job away from a returning starter at center in Terrence Moore, and then ended up playing pretty well all season long. And as exemplified by the fact that when he wasn't out there, when he got hurt and had to miss time, there was a fall. There was a drop with the play at the center position, whether it was the blocking or even just simple things like the cadence and the snap. It wasn't as good. It wasn't as crisp without him out there. I think Lyndon Cooper has a chance to be an all-conference player this year, and I think he's got an outside chance of being an NFL guy in in next year's draft. And so Lyndon Cooper I would put up there as an honorable mention among the best transfers Pat Narduzzi has added. I would also give an honorable mention nod to Kylan Johnson. Up until Servassier Dennis in, whatever year he really broke out, 2021, I guess. For the first 6 years of the Narduzzi era, Kylan Johnson was the best linebacker of Pitt's defense that Pitt's defense had. And he was only here for 1 season. He transferred in from Florida, but he had a really good season in 2019. And, Johnson was the best linebacker of the first 5 or 6 years in the Narduzzi era. And he also played on what was the first really good defense of the Narduzzi era in 2019. They were just okay. They had their moments, but they also had their weaknesses in 15, 16, 17, and 18. But in 2019, I feel like was the year when the defense really took a step forward. It's one of the best defenses they had, probably surpassed only by 2020. And maybe 2022. We could probably have a whole other podcast about that. But the defense really took a step forward in 2019. I think it was the best defense they had to that point. The first time there was truly a really good defense at Pitt under Pat Narduzzi. And I'm not going to say it's because they had Kylan Johnson, but he was a very good player and the best linebacker on a defense that ended up being the best defense to that point. So I think he had something to do with it. It's not entirely because of him, but he had something to do with it. And then the other honorable mention, and this guy could be on here just for one play alone. He's not on here for one play, but he could be on here for one play, is MJ Devonshire. And MJ Devonshire transferred in from Kentucky. We know his story, 4-star guy at Aliquippa, goes to Kentucky for a couple years, comes to Pitt. He had a bunch of interceptions over the years at Pitt, but the pick 6 to beat West Virginia in 2022, that's one of the all-time plays in Pitt history. That building has never been as loud as it was. And look, I was there when Ryan Lewis intercepted Penn State to clinch that game in 2016, and that was loud. That was crazy. The MJ Devonshire pick 6 it surpassed that. There's a few that stand out as the loudest I've heard. The Ryan Lewis interception against Penn State, I want to say there were two in the Clemson game in 2021. There was the Servassier Dennis pick 6 off the option play or whatever it was inside pitch play. But there was also a 4th down play when Taysir Mack scored on a 4th down. And that one was great because, and I always tell this story, it's great. They're lined up at 4th and short. They're deep in Clemson territory. Kenny Pickett drops back to pass. And like the whole stadium is like, what? And then they notice Taysir Mack just running wide open free. And the whole building erupts. And when Mack caught the pass and scored the touchdown, that place was alive. Those were some of the loudest moments I've heard in Acrisure Stadium / Heinz Field. The 2022 West Virginia game, MJ Devonshire's interception was the loudest. I thought they were bringing the house down. It was that special. And so for that play alone, MJ Devonshire makes this list. And he had other highlights. It wasn't the only highlight of his career. But for that one alone, he makes this list as an honorable mention, at the very least. All right, in our top 5. And this one you might have a little debate about. I think a few of these you might have a little debate about. Because at number 5, I put Eli Holstein. And I did so... I mean, there are a few reasons. He led them to a 7-0 start. He led them to their first and only undefeated non-conference record since joining a conference. He led them to their first win at North Carolina in forever. He led them to a win over West Virginia, a comeback win against Cincinnati. He ultimately went 7-3 as a starting quarterback. At Pitt under Pat Narduzzi, there have only been 3 quarterbacks who started more than 3 games and have a winning record. Yeah. There's Kenny Pickett, who was 32-17 as a starter. Nate Peterman was 14-10 as a starter. Eli Holstein was 7-3. Like, there are other guys with winning records. Nick Patty was 2-1. Chad Wojtek was 2-0. Nobody else has started more than 3 games and has a winning record. So, I mean, obviously your competition is like Max Brown, Ben DiNucci, Phil Dracovic, Christian Veer, these guys. But he's in that category. And, he was ACC Rookie of the Week 5 times. But Holstein very much could be higher on this list by next year at this time. And he could also be off this list entirely by next year at this time. Any outcome, I don't think there's any outcome that would surprise me. But for right now, based on what he did last season, the wins he had, the success he experienced, I got to put him at number 5. I got to put him in the top 5. Number 4 is a guy who's only here for 1 year. And I don't know if he's forgotten. You talk about Kylan Johnson sometimes getting forgotten a little bit. Stefano Millen. offensive lineman, left tackle, transferred in from Kent State, started every game on that team that won the ACC Coastal Division Championship, and it was really good as a left tackle. Had a really good 14 games at Pitt as the starting left tackle. And, he gets a lot of credit. There are a lot of unsung heroes on that team. I think most of the offensive line deserves that. George Aston deserves credit there for all those rushing yards and everything. But Stephen O'Millan, a lot of credit to him. I think he deserves a lot for that Coastal Division Championship. And so I put him at number 4. Number 3, I go with Nate Peterman. And, Nate Peterman was fine. Yeah, he became a joke in the NFL. At Pitt, he was fine. But for one Saturday, one day in his career, one game, he played the best game of his life and led Pitt to one of its biggest wins in school history. That Clemson, if we talk about MJ Devonshire's honorable mention on the strength of the pick 6 against West Virginia alone, Nate Peterman makes the top 5, and I put him at number 3 on the strength of the Clemson game alone. Like I say, he was 14-10 as a starter. He didn't win a bowl game as a starter. He was just fine. He was a solid player. But that Clemson game, I don't think he gets drafted. I don't think he gets talked about as an NFL draft prospect and goes on John Gruden's show and all that stuff, if not for that Clemson game. The best game of his life, one of the great performances by a Pitt quarterback, and one of the biggest wins in Pitt history. He became a legend that day, and he gets number 3 spot just because of that game. Number 2, another offensive lineman. I go with Marcus Minor. Marcus Minor, if nothing else, over the 2021 and 2022 seasons, he started 26 games. There are not many Pitt offensive linemen who can say they've stayed healthy enough to start 26 games over 2 seasons. That Pitt played 27 games, so he still missed 1 in there. But Marcus Minor stayed healthy. He was a consistent piece of the offensive line. He was a first-team all-conference selection in 2022. He was a big part of the ACC championship. And I think he was one of the better offensive linemen Pitt has had, and certainly one of the better transfer offensive linemen that Pitt has brought in. So I put Marcus Minor at number 2. Have you guessed, and again, you might have already read it, but have you guessed who I put at number 1? The number 1 transfer of the Narduzzi era. And this slightly controversial pick? I don't know. But he's on the team right now. Desmond Reed. Desmond Reed was one of 3 players in the country last year to put up 500 rushing yards and 500 receiving yards. And the other 2 guys both played 13 games. Reed only played 11. Reed was an All-American, a first-team All-American as an all-purpose player. I think he has a legitimate chance to go for 2,000 all-purpose yards next year if he this coming season, if he just stays relatively healthy. Like, not even like, oh my God, he never misses a snap. I mean, just relatively healthy. Only miss a game or 2, and he's got a legit chance to go for 2,000 all-purpose yards. He had 1,700 plus in 11 games last year. And if he goes for 2,000 all-purpose yards, he'll be the 3rd player in Pitt history to ever do that, along with Quadri Henderson and this other guy, Tony Dorsett from the 1970s. Like, Desmond Reed could legitimately be one of the biggest playmakers in Pitt history. He was Pitt's biggest playmaker last season. He enters this year as Pitt's biggest playmaker, and he's one of the most explosive and dynamic playmakers Pitt has had under Pat Narduzzi. Like, if you talk about just legitimately explosive playmakers under Pat Narduzzi, there's Jordan Addison. There's Tyler Boyd for a year. Quadri Henderson, you could say. I mean, in 2016, he was pretty dynamic. James Conner was James Conner. There's no question. I mean, he's very good. I don't know if he was explosive, but I mean, he was definitely a playmaker. And there's Desmond Reed. Like I think Reed is in that group. I think what he showed last season is that he is in that he's that caliber. He's that talented. He's that explosive. He's that much of a playmaker that, I'm comfortable doing it. I'm comfortable putting him number 1. And if you want to haggle about it, like, who would you put over him? Who has been a better transfer addition? And maybe you could say Marcus Minor, because he played 2 years. He was a starting offensive lineman for 2 years, and it was a big part of. I mean, they won 20 games over the course of those 2 seasons when Marcus Minor was the starting offensive lineman at Pitt. He might have only started 19 of them, but you get my point. So I could be convinced of that. Could Eli Holstein eventually take over the number 1 spot? Sure, absolutely. I think that's possible. Could Jaden Moore eventually take over? I mean, like, things can always change here. We'll do this again next year, and we'll see how the ranking shakes out. But for now, based on what's already happened and kind of what his status is with the team, I think Desmond Reed's the number one transfer of the Narduzzi era. 68 guys. 52 of them came in prior to this offseason. So 52 transfers who have been at Pitt for a season. I think Desmond Reed's number 1. You agree with that? Tell me in the comments or here on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. We'll have a little conversation about it. I think it's always an interesting conversation to have. But, all right, thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate it. Hope your week got off to a great start yesterday, and hope you have a great Tuesday. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And, yeah, have a great Tuesday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.